Welcome to another deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are going to be really digging into how Europeans feel about climate change. Um, we've got this really cool study
Yeah.
from Marketagent, and they're a European market research firm. And you know what they did? They went out and they talked to thousands of people
Mm-hmm.
across 38 countries.
That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. And what I thought was so cool about this is it's not just about the science.
Yeah.
It's about people's lived experiences.
Absolutely. I think, we often get caught up in the data and the kind of, almost like the academic side of things.
Yeah.
This is really about what's going on the ground. How are people feeling?
Yeah. And I mean, what are their worries? What are they seeing changing around them?
Yeah.
And even how they're trying to make a difference. So I think this study gives us a much richer picture of what's going on in people's minds.
I agree completely. And I think the first thing that jumps out at me is how high climate change ranks as a concern for Europeans.
Oh,
It's the #1 global issue, even above things like wars
wow.
and poverty.
That's pretty intense.
It is. It really highlights how much this issue is weighing on people's minds.
Yeah.
And while that concern is definitely present in Austria, too,
Mm-hmm.
it is a bit lower than the European average.
Interesting. Why do you think that is? Is Austria just less impacted? Or are there other factors?
Well, it's probably a mix of things. You have to remember, Austria's unique position, it's a landlocked country. So something like rising sea levels, which are a major concern,
Right.
for many coastal nations aren't as immediate a threat.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And plus, Austria has a strong history of environmental awareness and policies.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps there's a sense that, things are somewhat under control,
Mm-hmm.
even if there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a lack of concern, but maybe a different set of priorities or
Right.
perceptions based on their specific context.
Exactly. And this ties into another key finding. Nearly 8 out of 10 Europeans say they are already feeling climate change's impacts in their daily lives.
Wow, so this isn't some far-off threat anymore.
Right.
This is happening right now.
It's happening now.
Yeah.
And it's not just this vague sense of things being different.
Yeah.
The study actually asked people about the specific types of impacts
Oh, wow.
they're experiencing, and the #1 concern is extreme weather.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen the news reports of intense heat waves, devastating storms, unusual weather patterns becoming more and more frequent.
It's hard to ignore it when
Yeah.
it's impacting your own backyard.
Absolutely. What I thought was interesting is that things like rising sea levels or food shortages, while definitely concerning, ranked lower on the list of fears. Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. It suggests that people are most afraid of threats that feel immediate and tangible.
Okay.
So a flooded coastal city is a scary thought, sure. But a heat wave baking your town right now, that's a different level of urgency.
Yeah, it's like the difference between a distant rumble of thunder and a lightning strike right outside your window.
Exactly. And this sense of urgency is reflected in how people assign blame for climate change. A whopping 82% of respondents believe humans are at least partly responsible.
So the overwhelming majority aren't buying into any climate denial theories.
Not at all. Nearly half of those surveyed attribute climate change mainly to human activity.
Wow.
It seems that the scientific consensus is resonating with most Europeans.
Okay, so we've established that people are worried, they're seeing the effects firsthand, and they know it's largely our fault.
Yeah,
But what are we actually doing about it? The study digs into that too, right?
absolutely. They looked at both personal actions and perceptions of their government's efforts. On the individual level, there's a lot of what you might call low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Recycling, saving energy, things most people are already doing.
Yeah, makes sense. Those are the habits we've been encouraged to adopt for years.
Right.
Seems like they've become pretty ingrained for a lot of people.
Exactly. But when we look at actions that require more significant lifestyle changes,
Oh, yeah.
like reducing car use
Mhm.
or eating less meat, the numbers drop significantly.
Yeah, those are tougher asks. They require a bigger shift in our habits and routines.
For sure. And they often come with perceived barriers, whether real or imagined.
Yeah.
Maybe you live in an area with limited public transportation options,
Right.
or you're concerned about the cost of switching to a more plant-based diet.
I think that's that classic knowledge-action gap, right? We know it's good for the planet, but there's a disconnect between that knowledge and actually implementing those changes in our daily lives.
Precisely. And this is where things get really interesting. The study shows a clear awareness of the need
Okay.
for these more impactful actions. People aren't necessarily denying their importance,
Yeah.
but they're struggling to put them into
So
practice.
the question is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we move from good intentions to concrete action?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's something we'll explore further in our deep dive.
Okay.
But before we get there, let's talk about how people feel about their government's actions on climate change. Because from what I saw in this study,
Okay.
it's not a very positive picture.
Okay.
Only 30% of Europeans believe their country is doing enough.
That's a pretty stark indictment. And Austria.
Even lower. Less than 20% of Austrians believe their government is doing enough to tackle climate change.
Wow. That's a pretty harsh judgment. Clearly, there's a sense that politicians aren't walking the walk, at least not in the eyes of their constituents. What did the study say about why people feel this way?
Well, while this specific study didn't delve deeply into the reasoning,
Okay.
it does hint at a widespread dissatisfaction with the pace and ambition of government actions. Many respondents seem to feel that their governments are prioritizing other issues over climate change,
Okay.
or that they're not taking the threat seriously enough.
So it's not just about individual action.
Right.
It's about feeling like the system itself isn't doing enough to support those efforts.
Exactly. And this leads us to a crucial question. How do we reconcile individual action with the need for systemic change?
That's a big one. It's like we're being asked to run a marathon with one leg tied behind our backs.
Yeah.
We can put in all the effort we want, but without the necessary support and infrastructure, it's going to be an uphill battle.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And it's this feeling of being stuck, of individual actions not being enough
Yeah.
in the face of a global crisis that
Yeah.
we need to unpack.
Right.
It's the crux of the issue and what makes this study so fascinating.
So what can we do? Where do we go from here?
That's what we'll explore next. But before we do, I want to leave you with this thought. The study highlights a tension between individual agency and the need for systemic change. It's like people are caught in a tug of war between feeling empowered to make a difference in their own lives and feeling disillusioned by the lack of progress on a larger scale.
Yeah. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But by understanding the nuances of these perceptions, perhaps we can start to bridge that gap and find a way forward.
I hope so.
We were talking about this disconnect, between knowing we need to act on climate change, but actually doing it. It's like we're all kind of stuck in a rut a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah.
And I think what this study highlights so well is that there are, so many layers to this challenge. It's not just about a lack of information or awareness. It's about navigating, all the complexities of our daily lives and our habits and the systems that, shape our choices.
Right. And the study showed us, there are the things that people are already doing, like the easy wins, the recycling, conserving energy. But then there are those bigger changes, like cutting back on driving or meat consumption.
Yeah.
People just seem to struggle with more.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the study also found that, most people understand the need
Yeah.
for those more impactful actions. They're not dismissing them.
Right.
They're just having a hard time making them a reality.
So what's the holdup then? Is it simply a matter of willpower, or are there deeper barriers at play?
I think it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
On an individual level, there are psychological barriers like habit, inertia, and even a sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like our individual actions won't really make a difference in the face of such a massive global challenge.
Right. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon.
Exactly.
It can feel overwhelming and pointless.
For sure. And then there are the practical barriers.
Yeah.
Maybe you live in an area with limited public transportation options,
Right.
making it difficult to reduce car use. Or perhaps you're on a tight budget,
Yeah.
and sustainable options seem more expensive.
It's not always a level playing field when it comes to making those eco-friendly choices.
Absolutely. And this is where the systemic factors come into play. If our cities aren't designed for walkability or cycling, or if sustainable products are priced out of reach for many,
Right.
then individual actions can only go so far.
It's like we need a shift in the whole system, not
Yeah.
just tweaks to our own individual habits.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where the study's findings about government action become so critical.
Okay.
Remember, only 30% of Europeans believe their governments are doing enough on climate change.
Right.
And in Austria, it's even lower.
Yeah. That's a pretty clear signal that people feel let down by their leaders on this issue. Do you think it's a matter of governments not having the right policies in place? Or is it more about a lack of communication and transparency?
I think it's probably a bit of both. There's a sense that many governments aren't setting ambitious enough climate targets,
Okay.
or that they're prioritizing short-term economic gains over long-term sustainability. And there's also a lack of clear communication
Yeah.
about, what actions are being taken
Hmm.
and how individuals can contribute.
So people feel like they're being asked to make sacrifices without seeing a corresponding commitment from their leaders.
Exactly. And that can lead to a sense of cynicism and apathy,
Right.
which, further hinders progress.
It's a vicious cycle. But the study also highlighted some potential solutions, right? There was a lot of emphasis on the role of businesses and scientific research.
Yes, there's a growing recognition that tackling climate change requires a multi-pronged approach.
Hmm.
It's not just about individual actions or government policies.
Hmm.
It's about businesses stepping up and taking responsibility for their environmental impact.
So it's about holding corporations accountable for their carbon footprint and pushing for more sustainable practices across industries.
Exactly. And it's also about fostering innovation and investing in research and development.
Okay.
The study found a strong belief in the power of science and technology to help us find solutions.
So there's hope that new technologies and innovations can help us transition to a more sustainable future. But those advancements will take time, right? What can we do in the meantime?
That's where the power of collective action comes in. It's about using our voices and our choices to demand change.
Hmm.
It's about supporting businesses that align with our values and holding those who don't accountable.
It's about being conscious consumers and using our purchasing power to drive market demand for sustainable products and practices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also about engaging in our communities, advocating for policy changes, and supporting organizations that are working on climate solutions.
So it's about recognizing that individual actions are important, but they're even more powerful when combined with collective efforts to push for systemic change.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And it's about not losing sight of the fact that even though the challenge is daunting,
Yeah.
there are things we can do both individually and collectively to make a difference.
Right. We don't have to wait for someone else to solve this. We can all be part of the solution. I feel like we've been going back and forth a little bit on this. Is it about individual actions or is it about pushing for bigger systemic change?
Well, I don't think it's in either situation.
Mm.
It's both, really. Think of it like like a bike. You need two wheels working together
Okay.
to move forward.
Okay. I like it.
One wheel is, our own choices. Yeah. What we do day to day. The other wheel is the system, governments, businesses,
Mhm.
the structures that shape our lives.
Okay. I like that analogy. So if our individual actions are one wheel, what are some things that can make that wheel spin smoothly, so to speak?
Well, first you need to know where you're going. The study found that people are most likely to act when they feel informed, when they understand the problem.
Right.
It's not about guilt-tripping people. It's about empowering them with knowledge so they can understand, the impact of their choices.
So knowledge is power, even when it comes to something as seemingly simple as deciding how to get to work or what's for dinner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The study also found that, feeling connected to a community,
Yeah.
having a sense of shared purpose, can really motivate people.
Yeah.
It's easier to make changes when you feel supported and when you see others doing the same.
Right. It's like if everyone on your street starts composting, you're more likely to give it a try too. Yeah.
Exactly. And this circles back to the importance of that second wheel, the system. If governments and businesses are making it easy to choose sustainable options, it takes a lot of the pressure off individuals.
Right. Think about it this way. If public transportation is affordable and reliable, choosing not to drive becomes a no-brainer. But if it's a hassle and it's expensive, well, then that individual choice becomes much harder.
Exactly. And that's why, those findings about government action are so important. People want to feel like the system is working with them, not against them in tackling climate change.
So we're all on the same bike, but someone's got to steer and someone's got to make sure the gears are working properly.
A perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this study leaves us with a really powerful takeaway. Despite all the challenges, despite the frustration with government inaction, there's still this strong desire for change. People haven't given up.
There's still that yearning for a better future, that belief that we can find a way to make things right.
Exactly. And that's what I want listeners to hold on to. It's easy to get bogged down in the doom and gloom, but this study shows that there's a spark of hope, a sense of agency that we can tap into.
So it's not about feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem. It's about focusing on the areas where we can make a difference, whether it's in our own lives or by pushing for broader change.
Absolutely. And remember, those seemingly small actions multiplied across millions of people can create a ripple effect.
Right.
They can shift norms. They can spark innovation. And they can send a signal to those in power that we demand change.
It's like that saying, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Beautifully put. And that's the note I want to leave you on, dear listener. You have the power to be part of that change.
Hmm.
Embrace your agency, connect with others who share your concerns, and let's keep those wheels turning toward a more sustainable future.
Great advice. And for those of you who want to dive deeper into the insights from Marketagent's study, we'll include a link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating read, and it really highlights the importance of understanding not just the science of climate change, but, the human emotions and perceptions that shape our response to this global challenge.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into European perceptions of climate change. We hope it's given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Remember, every little bit counts. Stay curious, stay engaged, and let's keep working together to create the future we want.
Until next time, keep diving deep.